Their word, unburdened by the UN or world opinion preventing any challenge to U.S. dominance. But, they wrote, a year before September 11th, such aspirations are unlikely to be realized without a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor.
The destabilization of Iraq and Syria that we are seeing today was officially planned by Israeli-American dual citizens in 1996.
Iraq could experience ethnic strife among Kurds, Sunnis, and Shia.
Right. Like a new Pearl Harbor.
Good morning. I, for one, am sick and tired of all these Jews coming on C-SPAN and other stations and pushing us to go to war against our Muslim friends. They're willing to spend the last drop of American blood and treasure to get their way in the world. They have way too much power in this country. People like Wolfowitz and Fife and the other neocons that Jewed us into Iraq, and now we're going to spend the next 60 years rehabilitating our soldiers. I'm sick and tired of it.
John in Franklin, New York. Any comments?
Yeah, I think that, of course, American foreign policy is eventually up to the American people. One of the big things that we've not been able to discuss in this country for the last 30 years is our policy toward the Israelis. Whether we want to be involved in fighting Israel's wars in the future is something that Americans should be able to talk about. They may vote yes. They may want to see their kids killed in Iraq or Yemen or somewhere else to protect Israel. But the question is, we need to talk about it. Ultimately, Israel as a country is of no particular worth to the United States. It doesn't.
You mean strategically?
We have no. They have no resources we need. Their manpower is minimal. Their association with us is a negative for the United States. Now that's a fact. What you want to do about that fact is entirely different.
The destabilization of Iraq and Syria that we are seeing today was officially planned by Israeli-American dual citizens in 1996. Richard Pearl, Douglas Fife, and David Wormser wrote policy papers for Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and all went on to receive prominent positions in the Bush administration. These policy papers were titled Clean Break, a New Strategy for Securing the Realm. Again, this was in 1996, 7 years before the invasion, and 4 years before Saddam even began trading his oil for euros. Douglas Fife even wrote about his involvement on his own website. He just puts all the blame on David Wormser.
The United States could become so absorbed with its Iraq effort that we pay inadequate attention to other serious problems.
Yes.
The war could cause more harm and entail greater costs than expected. Obviously it has. That it would not go on for 2 to 4 years, but 8 to 10 years.
Right.
Terrorist networks can improve their recruiting and fundraising as a result of our being depicted as anti-Muslim. Iraq could experience ethnic strife among Kurds, Sunnis, and Shia.
Right.
It could damage our relationship with our allies and our reputation in the world community. Did you think that maybe 1 or 2 of these might happen?
One of the things that is reflected in this memo is Secretary Rumsfeld's deeply held view that it's foolish to try to predict the future.
Well, as it turned out, he was pretty good at anticipating problems because virtually all these things have happened.
Well, in a broad sense, a lot of these things happened. It was a very honest effort to assess what the downsides of war would be.
You still recommended that it was the right thing to do.
We certainly understood that these are the things that might happen. That's why we wrote them down.
1 year before 9/11, PNEC wrote about a catalyzing and catastrophic event, like a new Pearl Harbor, to launch all these wars. This was even featured on mainstream media.
But, they wrote, a year before September 11th, such aspirations are unlikely to be realized without a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor.
We went to war against a guy who had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. It was a total pretext. It's inexplicable. And there you go to Cheney, there you go to Bush, there you go to the Jewish neocons who wanted to remake the world. Maybe I can say that because I'm Jewish, and to bring about a certain result in the Middle East.
I'm not really sure that you can.
Okay.
I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure that.
Most of these neocons are Jewish. They control America's foreign policy. and are planning wars for the security of the Jewish state of Israel. This is even admitted in mainstream Israeli news. This article is titled, White Man's Burden. Most people will hear white America and then think of Bush, but this foreign policy that's murdering millions of people in the Middle East and Northern Africa is crafted almost entirely by Jews. A lot of people were saying, I hate Bush, Obama is going to be the savior, but then he followed the exact same foreign policy that Bush was carrying out. And now a lot of people are saying, I hate Obama, Trump is going to be the savior. These are nothing but frontmen.
You just said that this is, that 10 years ago you wouldn't have agreed to a regime change. However, in 1998, you as a member of the New American Century sent a letter to President
Senator,
Clinton.
I said something different.
No, wait a sec. You were saying we're seeing it in the light of September 11th. That's just not true. You've been advocating for regime change all through the late 90s. And in this letter,
Can I explain? There's a very clear
strategy
difference.
should aim, above all, this is 1998, the strategy should aim above all at the removal of Saddam Hussein's regime from power. You signed that letter.
Senator, there's a very big difference. I was very clear. I don't know if it's in that letter, but elsewhere, I never thought before September 11th that we should use tens of thousands of American troops to do the job.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
2 planes hit the 2 towers of the World Trade Center, but some very intelligent and aggressive cops also stopped another terrorist attack from happening on the George Washington Bridge. CBS 2 has learned exclusively that 2 men are in custody tonight after being arrested at the George Washington Bridge with an entire truckload of explosives. Now, I'm told that those explosives could have been enough to blow up the entire span and all the cars and the people that were on it.
Israelis were arrested on 9/11 with a van full of explosives. This was all over mainstream media the first day, then afterwards a media blackout. Instead of being sentenced to decades in prison like any normal person, they were pardoned. Those were Jewish terrorists arrested, not Muslims. They need people like Sam Harris to continuously talk about Muslims orchestrating 9/11, so that you don't learn who's really responsible for the death of 3,000 Americans.
A major terrorist manhunt began, and just 6 hours after the attack, the van was stopped at a roadblock by patrolman Scott DiCarlo.
We were asked to detain the van and the passengers. They were just removed from the vehicle.
911 call at 410 Park.
I think once the FBI arrived, one of them stated that they were on our side. There's something to that effect.
One of the Israelis arrested told Officer DiCarlo, "We are Israeli. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem."
more still, another group of Israelis detonated a van on 6th and King Street, which literally had a painting on the side depicting a plane crashing into New York and exploding.
Spencer, I got a message on that plane. It's a big truck with a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. All right, 10-4, I'll send the issue in the box. Both suspects under K. We have the suspects who drove in the van exploded. We have both of them under K. Let's get some help over here.
All of these vans and Israelis in them were working under the cover of a fake moving company called Urban Moving Systems, which turned out to be a front operation for the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. The Israeli owner of the company, Dominic Sitter, promptly fled the country a mere 3 days after the attacks.
A passerby took these photos of the police searching the van. 5 men were inside it. Some had dual nationalities and were carrying more than one passport. Others had flight tickets to leave the US within days. Fearing robbery, one had over $4,000 hidden in a sock. Their boss at Urban Moving, Dominic Suter, was questioned by the FBI, but then disappeared back to Israel. It left lots of unanswered questions and fueled suspicion about the 5 men. Investigators seized the firm's computers, and the investigation took on a new urgency with multiple lie detector tests. Paul Kurtzberg admitted serving in an Israeli army anti-terrorist unit. He refused to take a lie detector test for 10 weeks.